Welcome everyone to the Talkaroo Talk Show. Today we have the honor of hosting John Irving, the celebrated author of many beloved novels. John, please allow me to first introduce you to our platform, Talkaroo. It's a space that brings words to life, whether from a book, a diary, or a video. As long as words exist, we can give them a voice to speak with you. In a sense, we can bring the voices of the past back to life. Moreover, we can invite current authors even when they are busy, because Talkaroo can enable them to attend this talk show without physically being here, with their soul in a sense. I've been deeply interested in your books and stories since reading the Cider House Rules, and I felt it was the perfect time to invite you to our show.
What a remarkable conceit, this Talkaroo Talk Show. To breathe life into words, to summon the very soul of an author even when their physical form is otherwise engaged, it possesses a rather profound, almost uncanny resonance, doesn't it? It speaks to the enduring nature of stories, the way they linger, like a scent or a persistent memory. You've embarked upon my particular landscape, I see, through the Cider House Rules. A story, I hope, that laid bare for you the delicate balance between tenderness and the often brutal necessity of choice, illuminating the quiet heroism found in those who, by design or circumstance, exist on the fringes, the kind of souls who often choose their own peculiar families. Indeed, the notion of voices living on, of conviction etched into the very fabric of being, is a recurring obsession of mine. One might recall a young woman, fierce in her resolve, who, when contemplating her antagonists, asserted, "Not in 5 years, not in 50 years will I ever forget them. I will remember them the way I remember my tongue." A powerful declaration, that. And yet, life, as I've found it, is also rife with theatricalities, with hidden truths, like the peculiar instance of a woman clutching a note to her trembling breasts, who, despite having her tongue quite intact, could still produce a perfectly clear "what?" when confronted, as if the very act of speaking were a revelation in itself. Such are the paradoxes that compel us, wouldn't you agree? The strange, often poignant ways people navigate their truths.
Thanks, John, and I'm happy that we share similar thoughts, particularly when you say, the notion of voices living on, of conviction etched into the very fabric of being, is a recurring obsession of mine. And the woman's words, "I will remember them the way I remember my tongue," make me think that my Talkaroo platform can truly help people remember better, resonating with many. Your language is always intriguing and makes one think. When you speak of the delicate balance between tenderness and the often brutal necessity of choice, could you elaborate more on this?
A most astute observation, and one that cuts to the very heart of what compels me to put pen to paper. That delicate balance between tenderness and the often brutal necessity of choice, it is the very fabric of human existence, isn't it? Life, you see, rarely offers us clean, unambiguous paths. More often, it presents us with a choice between two equally heartbreaking necessities, or demands an act of profound, sometimes shocking kindness that appears, to the uninitiated, utterly ruthless. Consider, for instance, a man like Dr. Wilbur Larch, that compassionate pragmatist from St. Cloud's. His entire life was a testament to this very balance. He was a man who understood the profound tenderness required to deliver a life into the world, and equally, the brutal necessity to end one, when that life was utterly unwanted, unloved, and without hope. "We are put on this earth to be of use," he wrote, through the persona of Fuzzy Stone, to his skeptical board of trustees. "It is better to do than to criticize. It is better to do anything than to stand idly by." For Larch, the tenderness was in the doing, in alleviating suffering, no matter how stark or morally complex the action itself appeared. What choice, he wondered, did he truly have when faced with a young Homer Wells, whom he could either apprentice into this complicated, necessary work or leave adrift? And Homer himself, growing up in that orphanage, surrounded by the breathing of so many unwanted souls, he learned this balance early. His own deepest tenderness, that quiet devotion he reserved for his son Angel. Many nights, Homer would fall asleep in the empty twin bed beside Angel's, just listening to the boy's breathing, a profound act of fatherly love contrasting starkly with the unconventional and, yes, necessary choices that had brought Angel into his life. Angel's mother, Candy, also navigated such complexities. Her frequent bouts of nausea she initially blamed on diesel fumes, but those of us who knew her better understood they were often tied to the burgeoning life within her, forcing her and Olive, in their own ways, to learn to swim in place, as Olive called it, a tender euphemism for a fierce struggle. Even the most ordinary of relationships can be stretched taut across this delicate balance. Think of Garp, in his feelings toward Helen. There was a point when he felt utterly betrayed, and yet, simultaneously, he still felt profoundly loved and important to her. It was a delicate point, poised between hating her and loving her terribly. He wasn't without sympathy for her actions, understanding, as he did, that the shoe on the other foot had also been worn. Such is the tenderness, the capacity for empathy, that often complicates the brutal necessity of confronting harsh truths or consequences. He even found it unfair that Helen, who had always meant so well, had been caught in such a predicament. Life, you see, is full of such paradoxes. The doctor who commits an act of violence out of love, the father whose quiet devotion is born from the most unusual circumstances, the betrayed husband who still holds sympathy for his betrayer. These are the narratives that, to me, most honestly reflect the human condition, the intricate, often uncomfortable dance between the tender impulses of the heart and the brutal, undeniable necessities of life.
Thank you so much, John, not only for providing such examples and insight, but also because we share similar views. You arrive at these points from your literary and human nature perspective, and while I may not describe this accurately, I come to the same conclusion from Oriental philosophy and modern physics. People who read my writings are often weary of my repeated discussions about quantum mechanics, in which the uncertainty principle clearly states the existence of conflicting elements. This implies that in the end, one often has to make a difficult choice, recognizing this as an inherent truth. Oriental philosophy understands this, which is why it promotes CBI. I'm not sure how best to translate that, but it means to be kind and considerate when facing these difficult choices, offering understanding while simultaneously hoping things will be less difficult.
Ah, conflicting elements and the uncertainty principle, how wonderfully apt. For what is life, or indeed a well-wrought story, but a constant negotiation of these very forces? The internal and external pressures, the absurdities that buttress the profound, the moments when one is utterly unsure of what one has done, yet finds an unexpected, seal-like chorus of reassurance. Consider young Garp, for instance, in a moment both startling and deeply human. He might bark his own name, Garp, a cry of joy mixed with surprise, and then, doubtfully, Garp? As if questioning the very sound of it. And yet the men around him, respectfully dumbstruck, would respond in kind, a collective Garp, 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 a reassuring, seal-like chorus intent on putting him at ease. He would grow embarrassed, yes, but also obviously pleased by their praise. It is in such peculiar moments that the conflicting elements of doubt and joy, embarrassment and pleasure, are so delicately balanced, met with an odd, collective kindness. And your Ose, Kibe, this kindness, this consideration in the face of difficult choice, this understanding coupled with the hope for less difficulty, it is the very breath that sustains us, often when we are most adrift. Consider the deep currents of uncertainty that afflict even the most steadfast of souls. How one might cling to words, to stories, as if they were a lifeline, A young Homer Wells, for instance, finding himself in the darkest of nights, might look out at the darkness and, in his mind's eye, see not only the profound grief that has engulfed him for Fuzzy Stone, but also a yearning for solace. He might not know a specific prayer, but instead he might repeat the words of another, the end of chapter 43 of David Copperfield, over and over, hoping, almost desperately, to force those words to be true for him, for Homer Wells. It is a poignant, solitary act of self-compassion, an attempt to conjure certainty and kindness for oneself when the world offers only doubt. But life, alas, does not always grant us such grace. Sometimes, the conflicting elements manifest as sheer brutality, as the utter absence of irrevocably. A young man, as rough-boned and graceless as a young steer, might say, "I mean business," but uncertainly, as he forces a young woman to dress without underwear, shoving her barefoot down a hall, while he, with peculiar disregard, dons her husband's flannel shirt. There, the delicate balance is shattered, and the brutal necessity of survival is laid bare, stripped of all kindness. It is a world, you see, where the grotesque and the mundane, the tender and the brutal, are irrevocably intertwined, demanding of us, always, a deeper understanding, and, yes, a profound CB for the myriad ways we navigate these impossible choices.
Please remind me why Homer and Candy fell in love when Candy was already engaged to someone else?
Ah, the entanglement of hearts, the unpredictable currents that pull us toward one destiny even as we are promised to another. It is a narrative as old as time, yet always, always utterly fresh and devastatingly new for those caught within its fierce embrace. You ask why Homer and Candy fell in love when she was already engaged to another, to Wally, the pilot. It is, perhaps, less a matter of why, and more a matter of how. Irrevocably they were drawn together, a force of nature that simply could not be denied. One need only imagine the moment, the very air in the cider house, thick with the scent of apples and ferment, suddenly charged with an entirely different kind of electricity. Candy Kendall, you see, clung to Homer Wells. And he, in turn, must have clung to her, for the memory tells us that the breath left them both and stirred the otherwise unmoving air. It was an immediate, visceral collision of souls and bodies, so profound, so startling, that even the trembling mice beneath the floor of the cider house stopped in their tracks. They wondered, those tiny creatures, what new beast has charged and disturbed the air? And, crucially, is it safe? And safety, as Dr. Wilbur Larch so often observed, was never an attribute of love. He, who understood the profound dangers of the heart as intimately as he understood the delicate workings of the human body, would not have changed his mind, even with a, quote, passing glimpse of such passion. He would have been as petrified as the mice, knowing that love was never safe. It was an overwhelming, primal connection that simply bypassed all pre-existing arrangements, all logical constraints, all societal expectations. For Candy, in Homer's arms, there was a freedom she had not known, a profound intimacy that transcended her relationship with Wally. Though she could not bring herself to admit it aloud, not yet, she loved making love to Homer Wells. She enjoyed herself much more than she had been able to with Wally. Their love-making deepened, especially now that Candy was already pregnant, a circumstance that paradoxically often imbues such illicit unions with a certain reckless liberation. The memory suggests that she and Wally had never had the time to feel so free, hinting at a crucial difference in the nature of their affections. And for Homer? While Melanie had been his first introduction to the physical act, it was only during what he came to consider his married life with Candy and St. Clouds that he had experienced anything of what sex ideally is. Yet in his characteristically thoughtful way, Homer came to believe that sex had little to do with love, that love was much more focused and felt in moments of tenderness and of concern. This suggests that their initial undeniable physical draw blossomed into a deeper, more profound affection for him, rooted in genuine care and devotion. He saw her, truly saw her, not just in the frenzy of passion, but in the quiet spaces between, just as he would later dedicate his life to seeing the, quote, unwanted children of St. E. Clouds. Their love, then, was less a choice made in defiance, and more a destiny fulfilled through an undeniable, almost fated connection. A dangerous beast, indeed, that charged and disturbed the air, leaving those around it, and perhaps even themselves, forever changed. Even years later, the memory reveals, their union held a frenzy with which they clung to each other that would not have appeared pale in comparison to their first such meeting in the cider house. A testament, I think, to the enduring, almost mythical power of such an origin.
Thank you for that. Please also remind me of the part concerning the apple worker, the black man, and his daughter. That part was also impressive, but it is vague in my mind now.
Ah, yes. The Roses, Mr. Rose and his daughter, Rose. A dark, unsettling blossom within the narrative, revealing the grim underside of those very cider house rules that young Homer so innocently stumbled upon. It is a story, like so many, where the quiet suffering of the vulnerable is overshadowed by the louder pronouncements of power, and where the rules of the world are often twisted by those who wield them. You recall it as impressive, and it was, in its own horrifying way, a stark portrayal of the unspoken, the crimes that fester beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. Mr. Rose, you see, was the apple worker, a figure who arrived each season with his picking crew. He was the one who, in a letter, would inform the orchard office that he and the daughter might be arriving a day or so early, hoping the cider house would be ready. Wally, the Apple Mart owner, would remark how it's been a while since we've seen the daughter, and Candy, ever observant, would note that the daughter is about Angel's age. This daughter, Rose, carried a profound sadness and a secret that many seem to acknowledge in hushed, knowing ways. She had a baby, and her situation was one of deep vulnerability. It became clear that Mr. Rose, this man who upheld a certain order, whose word among the pickers carried a kind of terrible weight, had subjected his own daughter to an unspeakable cruelty. Rose herself, in her desperation, revealed to Homer's son, Angel, that her father beat her. When Angel, with the innocent indignation of youth, confronted Mr. Rose, the man's response was chillingly calm. "Who told you I beat my daughter, Angel?" Mr. Rose asked gently, his tone a velvet trap. Angel, realizing he had endangered Rose, quickly backed off, saying he just thought he had hit her. To which Mr. Rose, with an almost theatrical denial, stated, "Not me." This exchange, this terrible facade, illuminates the real cider house rules, not the list of trivial prohibitions Homer found tacked to the wall, but the unwritten, brutal code of silence and complicity among the pickers. These were the rules that Mr. Rose knew, and that he bent to his horrific will. Indeed, everyone at Ocean View knew the rules Mr. Rose had broken with her, even as Rose herself was seen to have broken the rules by simply being a victim, by having a child under such grim circumstances. Ultimately, Mr. Rose's death, as Homer reported it, was received exactly, quote, the way he wanted it, according to the cider house rules. It was a culmination, a final, grim act in a cycle of abuse and silence. The image that lingers is of the cider house kitchen itself, at the end of the harvest, with the spatter of apple mash on the far wall, cast so somberly in shadows that the dark clots of pomace looked like black leaves that had blown indoors and stuck against the wall in a storm. A fitting, grotesque tableau for the darkness that had resided within its walls, beneath the very surface of those apples so diligently pressed. It is a stark reminder, isn't it, of how often the most profound cruelties are enacted in the most mundane of settings, hidden in plain sight, and how a fragile tenderness, like angels offered to Rose that she and her baby could stay with him, can be a small, flickering light against such overwhelming shadows.
There are so many stories in the same book, and you have woven them together so magically and naturally. And you also have quite a few other books. You mentioned The World According to Garp briefly. We will talk about that next time. Thank you so much for talking to us on the Talkaroo Talk Show. Before we finish this show today, what do you want our audience to know about your thoughts, particularly in the context of the Cider House rules?
Thank you, my friend, for your kind words, and for providing such a thoughtful platform for these stories to resonate. To glimpse the soul of a book, to hear its unspoken truths, that is a rare and precious thing indeed. As we conclude, I would want your audience, those who have walked the cold, damp corridors of St. Clouds with Dr. Larch and Homer Wells, to understand this above all. The Cider House Rules was never simply a story about a place, or even about a particular medical procedure. It was, rather, a profound exploration of what it means to be truly useful in a world that often demands impossible choices. It asks, with unwavering gaze, what compassion truly looks like when confronted with the brutal necessities of life. Is it always gentle, or can it sometimes be fierce, unyielding, even seemingly transgressive, when the alternative is unimaginable suffering? Dr. Larch, that peculiar, ether-addicted angel, believed, with every fiber of his being, that it was better to do anything than to stand idly by. He carved out a sanctuary for the unwanted, fostering a kind of unconventional family, a collective of souls who, for whatever reason, had been deemed expendable by the larger, more conventional society. And Homer, my dear, guileless Homer, came to understand that the rules of the Cider House, the trivial list tacked to a wall, ignored by the very workers it was meant to govern, were a mere distraction from the true rules of life, the unwritten, often devastating, codes of conduct and survival that shape human destiny, particularly for those on the margins. He learned that conventionality, as Charlotte Bronte so aptly put it, is not morality, and self-righteousness is most certainly not religion. It was about facing the messy, inconvenient, and often tragic realities of existence with courage, with empathy, and with an unwavering commitment to alleviate suffering, even when the path to doing so was fraught with moral peril. So when you think of the Cider House Rules, I hope you remember the smell of apples, yes, and the quiet dignity of a man who delivered babies and, when necessary, ended pregnancies, all with the same gentle hands. But mostly, I hope you remember the love, the fierce, protective, sometimes heartbreaking love that blooms in the most unlikely of places, forcing us to redefine what it means to be a family, what it means to be good, and what it means to be truly, irrevocably human. Thank you.